Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm joined first by our fantastic team of lawyers at AP Lawyers, and we are all gathered to do myth versus law. And simply, I will be throwing out statements that the lawyers would confirm whether they're myth or law, and sometimes we'll give context, and other times we'll just move on. There might be times where people would disagree, and so who knows, there might be some debate, or maybe we would agree on everything. We'll find out. So let's get started. First, you need a lawyer for divorce or separation, myth or law.
Myth.
Myth.
Okay, consensus myth. You don't need a lawyer, but we all can agree that we highly recommend a lawyer, right?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so a divorce is automatically granted when requested. Myth or law?
Myth. Myth.
Okay. Anyone wants to explain why you're saying it's a myth? Because you're pretty much saying a divorce is not automatically granted, right? Who's going to go on the hot seat here? I think
I will.
Rabab.
Okay. I'll do
Sheree,
it.
okay.
Okay, so when you have issues relating to parenting and child support, the court will want to see that there's a settlement or a signed court order or an agreement dealing with those issues before applying for, not even applying, before granting a divorce, but also applying.
I mean, you can apply. It's, I guess, the granted is where the issue would
It's
be.
the
So,
issue.
okay, so it's not
Absolutely.
automatic. Parenting arrangements for children are now always 50-50 equal parenting. Myth or law?
Myth.
Myth.
Yeah,
Myth.
it's a myth. Ask your friends. So a mother, like, oh, it's not automatic. Like, if you, no, sorry, a mother always gets custody of the children or is the favored parent. Myth or law?
Myth. Myth.
Very much a myth.
Not true.
Babab, do you care to explain why that's a myth? Because people really do think that, like, mothers are the favored parents at the very least, right?
Yeah, I think that because obviously, like we're in the 21st century. I guess fathers are getting a lot more involved with their children, and so I think maybe in the past it may have like many years ago it may have been like the presumed way to go, but that's not really how it works anymore. Parents are getting 50-50. I have several files where dad has primary custody. It depends
Amazing.
on what's in the best interest of the children.
Exactly. Best interest only is what counts. There's no more presumptions. I remember back in the day when there was like the tender, I think sure, was it called I think
Tender
it was a
years
tender years
doctrine.
doctrine or something like that,
Yeah.
where, once the children were young, the presumption was that it was better for younger children to be with the mom. But I know we all have files where it's been better for the children to be with the dad even when they're literal babies. So that's a myth. If you have a will, you don't need to worry about estate planning. I'm going to skip that one. I mean, I'll just ask you guys because we're here already, but like, frankly, it is more of an estate law question, but here we are. If you have a will, you don't need to worry about estate planning. Is that myth or law?
It's a myth.
Myth, because I feel like a
think it's
will
a
is
myth.
only like one part of like the general, and like take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I am not a state lawyer, but
No, well,
I think
that's true. The will is only a part of like
yeah.
your estate planning package or whatever. And if for maybe for a lot of people, a simple will is more than enough. But you should always just consult with your estate lawyer to make sure it's complete. But today I have a panel of family law lawyers. Okay. Okay. So common law relationships have the same legal status as married couples. Myth or law?
Myth. Myth. Myth.
Yeah. I will get my legal costs back automatically.
Myth.
Myth.
Is
Giant
anybody
myth.
saying it's law? Fine. If I what if would it change your mind if I take the word automatically out of it? So simply I will get my legal costs back. Is that still a myth or law?
Still a myth.
Still a
Myth.
myth.
Yeah. Okay. Marriage contracts are not enforceable.
Complete myth.
Myth.
If my ex remarries, I do not have to pay child or spousal support.
Wouldn't that be
Myth.
nice?
Yeah, so no, even if your spouse remarries, you're going to have to pay.
I mean,
Yeah.
unless like it's a clause in like your agreement, I guess. Because
That's a good
some people
point.
do put it, yeah, in their agreements.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm
actually, long
generally
story
not
short,
a fan.
anyway.
I'm not a fan of it, but yes,
Yes.
it does exist. Yeah, and maybe at some point, right? So it depends, but a lot of people assume that once their partner remarries, that it's over and they don't have to worry about support anymore. But that's a myth.
It's a
Like
very
all
common.
things family law, it may depend on the facts of your case. Oh, Shia, you were gonna add something.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a very common question.
Yeah. I can see where it's coming from, but
Mhm.
it's still a myth, right? Okay, if my spouse cheated, they get no spousal support. Myth or law?
Myth.
This is a
Okay.
very painful
I,
one for a lot of
I
people.
know everybody's laughing so much. So why? Like they cheated.
Yeah, but sorry, we just don't work that way in Ontario. It's no fault system. I mean, do I wish it could be that way for some? Maybe. But
Yeah, there's some cases where it almost feels like it would be justice, but we
Mhm.
decided a long, long time ago that it's a no fault system. So
Mhm.
unfortunately, yeah, child support ends at 18 years old. It's a
Myth.
law.
Myth,
Myth.
depending on, I guess, facts. Because if your child's not pursuing further education and is obviously not going through a disability, but remains, if they're independent at the age of 18, it's not a myth, if that makes sense.
Yes, that is true.
Mhm.
Or even if they're not, you're right. Even if they're not independent, because we have had, I think I had a case with someone that had a gap year, and that's an interesting one because
Yeah, that too.
like we can I guess we can understand why the child would be taking a gap year. We can also all appreciate that during that gap year they're not necessarily independent because for a lot of people out of high school they don't have enough skills to kind of support themselves full time. But should the other party still have to pay support for a child that's not going to school or not doing so? Well, that's a conversation you would have with your lawyer. But the point is, just the takeaway for you is at 8, child support does not automatically start end at 18, except the child is like actually independent. Okay, I don't have to pay child support if my child is living with my ex-partner and I am contributing to their post-secondary education. Is that myth or law?
That's
Myth.
loaded.
That's like deep law because well, deep myth or law. Like I just mean it's a deep question. I'm not suggesting the answer here, but the question you don't have to pay child support if the child is living with I guess one of the parents
Yes.
and you're contributing to the post secondary education. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think it is a myth because again, post-secondary education, if you're paying for the post-secondary education, that falls under a different classification called the Section 7 expenses. And just because you're doing that doesn't preclude you from your obligation to pay child support as well.
Who's gonna Okay, I was like I wanted to take the other side here. Okay.
Yes, and like, however, if the child is living primarily while still going to school with a parent, then child support is still a factor. It's still relevant. So if the child is living, so I guess it's case dependent if the child's living away, if it's the full table amount of child support, or if it's partial, if they're only coming for the summer months. So
No, so
it
wait,
doesn't,
Babab, you're saying child support should still be payable, right? Because
Yes.
those are section like the post
7
secondary are section
expenses.
7 expenses. Now,
Yes.
Shirin, what are you saying? Are you saying child support? You sounds like you're saying the same thing as Rabab that child support should be payable still.
only in the event that the child lives with the parent. If the child does not live with the parent and is living on residence, child support should not
I
be
was
paid.
about to say, do you want to define live?
Yes, so
Because
there's,
live,
yeah,
as you define it, because live, they're still coming home during the summer, right? So you're defining living as the majority of the school year
yes,
when they're in residence.
yeah.
Okay. Is there a third view by any chance? I think that kind of covers it. I agree. Okay. I do not have to pay child support if I have shared parenting. Myth or law?
Myth.
I mean,
That's such
if
a
your
big myth
incomes are
there.
exactly the same, then technically the net effect would be zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
I
most
mean,
people really think they don't have to pay. And like you would
I
see
mean,
someone with a huge difference in incomes and they're fighting just to get shared because they think it means, they don't have to pay any child
Mhm.
support.
Yeah, and
I
I'll
mean,
add a
unless they
caveat
agree
to,
to not to pay child support to each other, then that's a different situation.
I know it's
then I mean,
another
we
thing,
know
but it
child
could be
support clauses.
sketchy. It could also be
Child support
sketchy.
clauses are
also
Yeah.
like
sharing the set off amount, which is what would happen in the event of a shared parenting schedule, is not automatic. So big caveat to that.
Yes, that's another thing too. So I don't,
yeah.
so sure you said yes, the parties can agree. And if it's a smaller amount, like the courts would generally uphold that. Like someone, if you're like paying $100 between each other, like that's fine. We could decide we don't want to pay anything to the other. But the risk on the party that's supposed to be paying that $100 a month runs it. Well, come 10 years from today, when they gather all of that, $100 a month and it
Risk.
becomes something significant, you
Significant, yeah.
might be like kind of be on the hook for support, right? But and then the setup, yeah. So she was thinking about the setup amount as well. I kind of forgot what that was, but anyway, point is, you might have to pay child support regardless, except your incomes are exactly the same.
But even with the like exactly the same situation, sometimes there's like CRA issues whenever people are claiming benefits. So it's like technically like the net effect is that you're not paying anything, but sometimes just for like CRA, like sometimes people still have to just make those payments to show that they are supporting the child and like they can claim like those
They're
benefits.
receiving support to be able to get that's a very good point actually. Well, I think what Shireen had said that skipped my mind was even in a shared parenting arrangement, it's not necessarily automatic that it would be this setup because the courts can look at the conditions, means, and whatever
Yes.
of the parties.
Yeah,
But
so there's no automatic presumption, I should say,
For
that
set
it
off.
should
I
be.
feel like it's starting to be a trend.
Yeah, I feel like that's the direction people go like first before they make any. Everybody's just like, okay, let's just do start off.
Yeah.
Because yeah,
So I like this next one. I do not have to pay child support if I pay for some clothing or groceries.
No,
I feel like I get this in like almost every console.
I had a client that asked me that question.
Yeah.
no, I mean, it's better off in that sense to pay the child support because those are what child support covers: the welfare, the care, shelter, food, and clothing. Of course, if it's a nominal amount, that's a different story, but
No, but
typically,
what do you guys think when someone says to you, I don't know what they're doing with the money, like, I don't know, she's going on
Designer.
vacations with
yeah.
her, she's just squandering the money. I want to buy the groceries and the clothing myself. What would you say to that person?
Unfortunately, that's not how
Um,
child support works. Child support's
sorry,
related to the child.
law's the law.
As much as I think I've even heard scenarios where people want to pay directly to the child,
To the child, I've heard that too.
and want to then also see where those funds are being allocated once they do pay child support. That's not how it works. So unfortunately, that's not it.
Oh, sorry, Liberty, you wanted to say, oh, I thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, well, I was actually gonna say, well, what do I think and what's the law is probably different, but I would say that, yeah, I would agree that's not how child support works. Now, what I think is, I would think that person is reasonable wanting to see where the money is going, but yeah, that's not how the law
Especially
works.
if the child is it's an older child, it makes sense, right?
Okay, the next one is spousal support is always awarded in divorce cases. Myth or law?
Wait, so what was the question?
Spousal support is always awarded in divorce cases.
Myth.
Yeah, it's a myth. Um, Spousal support is always paid by the man, the husband in this case.
Myth.
Yeah. How this is an interesting one. We don't have to divide property because we are not married.
Myth.
Yeah,
You know why I like it? On the face of it, it sounds like law, right? Because we already know that common law spouses don't have a right to equalization. But the trick here, which you all knew, why you're amazing, is that they said divide property. We did not say equalization. So you could still divide property in the context of a family law relationship, even though you're not equalizing property. Okay. So I owned the matrimonial home before marriage, and I don't have to share it with my spouse.
Myth.
Myth.
this is a painful one. This is always a very painful one for
And
people.
this is why we say get a marriage contract.
Get a marriage contract.
The interesting thing too is there's times where I've had the other person come to me and say something like, "Yeah, they owned the home before marriage, so it doesn't count." And we're like,
Many times.
"Surprise, it counts." And especially if it's your matrimonial home, I shall give you half of the value of that home because there's even no date of marriage deduction. So I know I'm
Congratulations.
laughing a bit, and for some people, this is a very painful and sore spot. But the idea, we're trying to make the point that you need a marriage contract really for if you own any kind of property that you don't intend to share. If God forbid things don't work out for you and you need to be talking to a lawyer. Okay, so I have a business. It's in my name only, and I don't have to share it with the other spouse. So this is business, not home.
Myth,
I mean,
unfortunately.
it's their business. They worked for it, isn't it? Isn't it the law? It's in their name. It's like a job. I'm trying to get in the mind of, a non-lawyer looking at this, right? Like it's like a job. Why do I have to share my job with you, right? And I mean, for context, like someone would say, well, yeah, so don't believe me. No, they're right. It is a myth because the business is an asset in and of itself, separate from whatever income it's generating. So yeah,
Yep.
so those it definitely would be divided. The next one, domestic violence has no impact on my parenting rights. Myth or law?
Myth.
Yeah. Property outside of Canada does not get included in the division of assets.
Myth.
Another favorite one of mine.
Myth. All those
For
amounts you're
sure.
sending to foreign countries, not
The
gonna fly.
houses that like you're owning in foreign countries, like all of that goes in your financial statements and is eligible to be equalized.
Yep.
Even property that you
Um,
just have an interest in.
sorry, Shirin, what did you say?
I'm just saying, even foreign property that you may have an interest in are to be disclosed.
Yep. I mean, yeah, we did have a trial that involved someone that owned property with siblings or something. I believe the property was in Jamaica or somewhere, and it involved there were siblings that also owned the property. And obviously, they're not going to get the other siblings' interest, but that's 1/5 of an interest in that property outside of the country forms part of, the equalization process that was happening in Ontario. Okay, so this is one of my favorites. If I move out of the home, I lose all my rights to the home. Abandonment. You guys heard about abandonment? Anyone ask you about abandonment? Okay. So, yeah, so is that
Yeah.
myth or law that if you move, you've abandoned the family and so you don't get to, share assets or deal with parenting or whatever, you've abandoned the family?
It's a myth. However, there may be some other consequences for doing that because then it could be a situation of even if you've left the matrimonial home and you've now moved into your own apartment, you're still expected to pay for half of the bills of the matrimonial home. We're also talking about issues with parenting because now if you have children and now you've left the matrimonial home, you're no longer in the same house with the children. And so it's not really something that may be recommended if you don't have like a parenting plan or something like that in place, unless it's a completely untenable situation where, you just can't be in that situation anymore. But again, speak to a lawyer. Everything we say has a caveat of speak to a lawyer about
No,
your
but at
particular
least it's not
circumstances.
abandonment. I like that you brought these up because you're looking at the more practical consequences.
Yeah.
But I think there is a law of abandonment somewhere, but it's not really in Ontario. Here, even if you leave the home, you could still. So let's say you move out and you're able to pay your share of the mortgage, for example, on the matrimonial home. When it gets sold, you haven't abandoned your rights to get your money from that home, correct? At least we all can agree on that, right? But yes,
Yeah.
I like that you mentioned that because that's what I always tell people is yes, you can move, but from a practical perspective, is that something that works for you? Okay. Sorry, that's the abandonment. If there is no formal agreement, each spouse keeps what's in their name.
I mean, if they never come
Yeah.
back.
That is law, actually, if we think of it. If it's past the limitation period,
Yeah. And nobody does anything about if nobody does anything about it to try to set the limitation period aside, sure, keep whatever
yeah,
you want.
whatever is in your name is yours, and
Yeah.
it's yours forever.
Not
So if
advisable.
you have separated from your spouse, please remember you have 2 years from the date of the divorce or 6 years from the date of separation to make a claim. Okay? If not, yes, then whatever they take in becomes theirs and there's nothing that can be done. Okay. So pensions, businesses, and investments are excluded from property division.
Myth.
Yeah, so we have talked about businesses before, but this is now including pensions and investments as well. So is that myth or law? Are they excluded from equalization?
Myth, unless
No,
you have a
they're
marriage
they're not excluded.
contract or a cohabitation agreement indicating that, but no, a myth.
Okay. Okay, so going to the next page, we have if you represent yourself in court, you don't have to worry about paying costs. Is that myth or law?
Myth.
I thought in this case you might even be exposing yourself to even more costs, right? Because of your actions, things don't move forward efficiently. If you're not, you might even actually end up paying more costs.
Also, with that as well, I've heard some people say things like, "Oh, since I have a lawyer and they don't, even if I lose, I don't have to pay their costs because they don't have a lawyer," which is not the case. because people think that just because the other side is unrepresented, there's no legal cost to be paid. That's actually legal costs
Yes,
could
you
be paid
still
actually.
have to take costs to them, even though. But it reminds me of an interesting case that you had brought up recently, that some case that you had read, and it had to do with the self-represented party asking for costs, and then the cost they were asking, they increased their hourly pay. However, the point of the entire motion they had
So
was
just child support.
that party claiming that their income was lower come
Yeah.
to a motion claiming your income is $20 an hour, and then you've been successful in reducing child support, and
Support
then now you go to ask for costs, but you're asking for costs at $50 an
higher.
hour. Like that
Yeah.
was that was
Such an
funny.
interesting case.
Yeah, that was interesting. So if you're trying to argue for costs as a self-represented party, yeah, apply wisdom or
Yes.
talk to a lawyer at least. Just consult with one at the very least. Okay. And sorry, where was I? Okay, so I have because I have the children, I do not have to pay spousal support. Is this myth or law?
I think this is like another like painful one for people too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you have the children and
You
still
still have
have
to
to
pay
pay
spousal
spousal
support.
support. Well, with any law, the other side pays child support, or you could set it up. It'll depend on the circumstances of the case, I guess. We were only married for 3 weeks, so I can just get an annulment. Is that myth or law?
Myth.
Myth. And the last two, if I leave the country, I will not have to pay child or spousal support. Is that myth or law?
Myth.
Myth.
Myth, like one that people should take very seriously because like you could be in big trouble if you do
No,
that.
you could just be traveling somewhere and then your passport's like suspended and now you're stuck in a foreign country. So be very careful with that one. And the last question is, if I quit my job, I do not have to pay child support. Is that myth or law?
Myth.
Myth.
And again, another one that could get you in trouble because income will be imputed and then now you're paying on the basis of an income that you don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it could depend if you quit your job for medical reasons or reasons you had to. I've had situations where someone was diagnosed with cancer, had to go through treatment. In those circumstances, there are very rare circumstances that it would not be an indication of underemployment.
Yeah, oh, that is true. Yes, if there are legitimate reasons for you quitting
So
your
have
job,
to
then
quit
yes,
your
you may
job.
not be required to pay child support. But if the reasons are not legitimate, and most cases the courts would see as not being legitimate, so be very careful because, like Rabab said, you might find income imputed to you, and then now you're paying support on an amount that you're not earning because you quit your job
I
already.
will say
Wow.
this most common threat that I would get, I'll just quit my job. And so just don't do it. If you do have a legitimate reason, you still want to speak to a lawyer about it because
Yeah.
what you deem to be legitimate and what actually would classify as an ability
It's
to not pay
legitimate. Yep.
support,
Very
very
different.
different.
No, but even sometimes, oh, I apologize. I thought so. Sometimes people have even said things like, there's been situations with, oh, I lost my train of thought because of that. That ringing. I don't know if you guys heard it, but there's a phone ringing here. But people the reasons why people think that support would stop and it's just not always aligned. So I've had people think that having a business like quitting their job to pursue their dream business or something is a legitimate reason. Now that might be legitimate when you're still together. That might be legitimate because you might become the next Zuckerberg and advance, all of humanity. And that's great, but unfortunately, the family law courts are not that optimistic. In a lot of cases, people have quit to start a business and they've had income imputed to them. So I second what Shirin was saying, like do talk to a lawyer before you make such a move. All right, ladies, we did it. So that's where we're going to stop for today. And yeah, and until next time, it's bye for now. Bye.
Bye.